I think in a way we have to stop thinking about them as separate things. It's a bit more than learning from each other. It's a bit more about integrating. When you're worrying about compromise of the network, in a way it doesn't matter whether it's fraud, it's terrorism, or whether it's simply maliciousness. In many ways the access points are the same for those problems, and understanding the vectors and understanding the risks becomes a holistic exercise. So you really actually have to work together on this stuff.
Cyber and financial crime are running through an interesting convergence at this point in time, and traditionally cyber has been very much a signature-based, device-based analysis environment. Financial crime moved on from that a long time ago and moved into large-scale data analytics. And what this allows you to do is to expose unknown attacks before they occur, rather than looking for signatures that you've already discovered. And I think this is a key trend in cyber. Cyber is moving to a situation where detecting signatures are no longer useful.
We see a lot of synergies between the fight against financial crime and cyber crime. In financial crime, traditionally, you'll be looking at understanding your counterparty, who are the decision makers, who are the ultimate beneficiary owners, and things like that. Now, for security, you will also want to understand what are the controls being put in place by your counterparty. And by the way, that is the spirit of the self-attestation, which is being put forward by SWIFT as part of the customer security program. In both cases, you'll be looking for unusual patterns, unusual amounts, unusual parties. So both techniques, financial crime and cyber crime, will somehow be leveraged to be more effective together.
I think the key thing is to get used to the idea that no complex network is completely secure. Things that are fraudulent or a hack, if you like, will get into the network. So you've got to worry about two other things, which is detection and then response. Understanding how to do that is something that the fraud guys are kind of familiar with, and learning from them how they not only stop things getting in the first place, but if it happens, detecting it through pattern analysis, looking at the flow of transactions, responding to that. That stuff is well developed in the fraud area, and we can learn from that in terms of cybersecurity.
So compliance and fraud have been related disciplines for many years. What you'll typically find is people executing fraud and laundering money, if they're organised criminals, through exactly the same channels and through exactly the same processes. So sharing the data across that, sharing the checking data, sharing the ongoing due diligence, and monitoring again with these big data and analytics applications is a key way to expose both types of behaviour at the same time.
In the traditional financial crime, for AML, we'll be looking at transactions after the facts, while unfortunately for cybercrime it's a bit more complex, because you will want to look at those transactions in the flight. Banks will want to apply a risk-based approach depending on their own risk profile. They may accept transaction coming from a counterparty which is weaker in terms of security mechanism, but they will make that up by having more stringent mechanism on their own to check the incoming transactions. At SWIFT, from an organization perspective, we do believe that those synergies should benefit our users, and therefore we have decided to regroup all those activities in one single group.
I think the engagement of the community, the understanding of the problems, and the insights gained from working together is probably the most important thing. Regulation has a place to play, but it's mainly about bringing along the laggards. The community needs to work out how it's going to respond to existing threats, and then make sure that the last few people who perhaps haven't got the message are brought along, if you like, by the regulation.
So I think financial crime regulation today isn't that focused on cyber as a capability or as a technological threat vector. So cyber is a means to an end, and the organised criminals certainly have discovered cyber as a way of automating and scaling out attacks. So I think what's more likely to happen is the regulator seems to be moving to a position where they're requiring financial institutions to understand the cyber threat and to have adequate controls and mitigations and capabilities as part of protecting their customer data, as part of protecting the transactions and the consumer.
Well, for quite some years now, the law enforcement community and the banking industry between them have run quite a coherent, quite a successful anti-money laundering regime. Works really well. Those of us in the law enforcement sector rely on that to track the movements of suspicious monies through the banking system. Now, what we haven't got so far is a similar regime on cybersecurity threats. That's because it's a more recent threat. but the scale of that threat is at least as high as traditional areas of financial crime. So we need to get to the same kind of concept of this being a community-wide partnership challenge, banks, law enforcement, others as well. They're in the business of not being afraid of sharing data with their competitors, but actually recognizing that all banks are potentially at risk from very serious attacks which lead to very serious losses on their corporate line.
Financial crime and cyber crime are major areas which are not competitive weapons. We should not be competing with each other to outdo each other as bankers. We need to collaborate with each other to raise the bar so these things don't happen, to protect our industry. Our industry is a good industry. When it was abused, it harms the industry. So we really have to come together and combat it in every which way we can.